All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, I want to send all of you thank you for your tremendous support. People are slowly but surely finding out about who we are and what we do. They enjoy and respect the passion with which we speak. We do this because we love it, as we share our passion with you all, as we continue to build our listening army to take over the world. Well, usually when we do any type of top 10 lists, we like the list to be in order. We don't want any breakups in the list. We just like when it's posted on YouTube, we want the simple countdown from 1 to 10, or as we post, down from 10 to 1. So we take great pride in doing that. We hold off on other topics in sports that we like to cover for that reason. And that's just us being very anal about it. But we love when we do any type of top 10 list, there is no break in the order in terms of other content. However, we have to do this show because it was a huge shakeup in the world of professional boxing, like you're seeing on your screen, and we are going to do a review of Dmitry Bivol versus Canelo Alvarez. Now, going into this fight, this was part of the Canelo Alvarez taking over the world. There was already discussions that there was going to be a third fight set up where he was going to have to move back down to the super middleweight division, the 168-pound class, for a third fight with Triple G, Gennady Golovkin. So Dmitry Bivol, the WBA light heavyweight champion, was seen as a stepping stone in order to make this third fight happen, which would have furthered Canelo's legacy to pick up titles in 154, 160, 168. He already had beaten a shop-worn, and I would say shot, Sergey Kovalev in 2019. So this was the Canelo taking over the world routine. And a lot of his handlers, I felt, picked Bivol because he presented the least problems. If you want to compare him with the other light heavyweight champion of the world, Artur Beterbiev. Now, there was even talk online of Canelo even moving up to the cruiserweight division once he got past Bivol, once he got past Triple G, for potential fights at cruiserweight, and even talk of him even possibly fighting Alexander Usyk, who has a version of the heavyweight championship of the world, but he was a cruiserweight who actually moved up in weight. So there's been talk all over the place of how far Canelo Alvarez could really push this thing. But let's really go into really our fighters here. The reason why we believe that Canelo and his handlers chose Bivol, because on paper he presented the least problems. And the reason why: only 20 total fights. That's it, folks. Only that number of fights, with only 11 knockouts. So this is a guy who is not as experienced as Canelo. He does not have the knockout power. Now, he does have the amateur pedigree, winning different championships in Europe, the World Combat Games, representing Russia. So again, even though, yes, he was moving up in the light heavyweight division, but we feel that, of course, he was the best option on paper, style-wise. Now, versus Canelo Alvarez, we're talking already 60 total fights with 57 wins, 39 wins by knockout, with only one loss, and that one loss was to the great Floyd Mayweather. So we're talking a man who has more KO wins than total fights that Bivol has. So that was, I think, the feeling going into this fight. And folks, it was not to be. If you watch the opening round, Dmitry Bivol came out, I thought, fought a very tight, disciplined fight. I think the Canelo people thought these three things was going to make the difference. Canelo's punching power, his constant pressure, because yes, Canelo he does punch hard, he does have excellent punching power. His constant pressure, that constant coming forward in the mode of a Julio Cesar Chavez, and by what you just heard with the disparity between the records, the experience. So they were banking on Canelo's punching power, his constant pressure, as well as his experience would make this fight and would help him win the fight against one Bivol. And if you watch that fight, going into the opening round, Bivol fought a tight, disciplined fight. His jab was more of a range finder, but it found a home. It wasn't a Larry Holmes type jab, but it was something that he kept pawing it out, kept Canelo at bay, really set home the range, found a home for his right hand. And something interesting, in the first round, he utilized a lot of angles for Canelo. So really the first round, we thought that Bivol won it based on pure activity. In the second round, we gave the second round to Canelo based on his activity, landing harder punches, seemingly working his way into the fight. Because if you remember the Kovalev fight, he started off very slow. He tended to figure Kovalev out, and what Bivol was doing was kind of the same mode of Kovalev, but as a third and a fourth round would now illustrate, it was a bit of a different attack because now we're mixing in combination punching as well as attacking Canelo to the body. Well, even the commentators on the DAZN broadcast even say that this is one of the few times that opponents have really targeted Canelo's body. And Canelo has already had issues and questions with his stamina, so I think, and now he's also carrying extra weight again. So with Bivol attacking his body, now presented another challenge for Canelo. Now, what was interesting to us in the fifth round, as Bivol now starts to land combinations, and there's an old saying for boxing fans, the way to beat a counterpunch, because we will say this about Canelo, he is an excellent counterpuncher, but the way to beat a counterpuncher is by throwing multiple punches, is by throwing combinations. And Bivol threw hard, fast, quick combinations. He didn't put all his body into it. He didn't sit down on the punches. He used his length. He fought at distance, and he was catching Canelo with some sweet, quick combinations, and Canelo, he really couldn't respond to that. In the fifth round, at one point where you had Canelo's back against the ropes, you see Bivol landing a 3-4 punch combination. Now, Canelo has always had this thing in some of his major fights where he will play possum and try to bait his opponent in by backing up against the ropes, by letting his opponents just swing freely and landing something hard and countering right off the ropes. The problem is Bivol did not fall into that trap. As you saw Canelo trying to drag Bivol into the heat of his passion, you actually saw Bivol, he was telling Canelo, no, you get off the ropes and let's fight. So that was kind of interesting, where the normal Canelo strategy of trying to bait his opponent in, quote, playing possum, wanting his opponent to empty out the tank because Canelo could have slipped some shots on the inside and was hoping to land a hard counter. That strategy didn't work because Bivol didn't fall into it. Also with Bivol, you also saw how he kept his right hand as tight to his head as possible, blocking the Canelo left hook. So it's a lot to be said for fundamentals. In the sixth round, it was more the same. He was catching Canelo, backing Canelo up against the ropes, just jabbing Canelo, throwing the occasional right hand. So you saw the same process playing out in the 6th, 7th, and the 8th round. In the 9th round, which is maybe a round that people can really give Canelo, and that wasn't really by a whole lot here. And in the 10th, 11th, and 12th rounds, these rounds were clean sweeps by Bivol. I don't know what the hell Canelo was doing when he was getting caught with some clean left hooks in the 11th round, and him and Bivol got tangled up, and he literally picked Bivol up where it was going to be a UFC 2 points for a takedown. And we give Dmitry Bivol all the credit for winning a clear unanimous decision. It's a damn shame with some of these boxing scorecards how they only scored that fight 115 to 113. It appears when you actually look at the scorecards that had Bivol not won that last round, that fight probably would have been scored a draw, and there's no way watching that fight was a draw. Now, Canelo was not physically, quote, beat up. Clearly, he wasn't knocked out. He wasn't really hurt in that fight. He was just beaten by a fighter who fought a tight, disciplined fight, who let his hands go, who landed combinations, and who also attacked him to the body. Now, one can make an argument, did Canelo's power move up in weight with him? Listen, I think that this guy fought a tight, tactical, brilliant fight. He definitely did what he had to do. It was at times where he outboxed Canelo. It looks as if maybe in that 12th round, I think mentally Canelo even knew there's nothing I could do with this guy, because really in the 9th round, it was his last stand. The 10th round was trying to be his last stand, and you can tell he tried to give everything he could, but anytime he tried to seize the momentum, we felt that Bivol seized the momentum right back by landing hard combinations, catching Canelo with beautiful left hooks, especially in that 11th round. So the question now is, and we love how people tend to move the goalposts. As we stated earlier, there was talk of Canelo Alvarez even going so high, fighting possibly for the heavyweight championship of the world or fighting for the cruiserweight championship of the world, because Canelo, yes, had established himself as a top fighter, pound for pound in the world, post Floyd Mayweather. He fought a Bivol who didn't have the experience, who didn't have the punching power, but was clearly a well-schooled, basic, fundamental fighter. Well, it was nothing spectacular per se, where you can't say, well, there was one thing that he does well, whether he's a knockout puncher, whether he was this. He was a fundamentally skilled fighter who kept his hands up. He utilized his jab, dropped in his right hand, had a sneaky left hook, didn't really sit down on his punches, because of course if he sat down on his punches, that would have opened up counter opportunities for Canelo Alvarez, and it's something that he just did not do, and we felt he fought a tight fight. So now the question goes, what happens now? On one end, you want to see a unification fight between Bivol and the aforementioned Beterbiev. That's a fight we'd like to see. Of course, boxing fans now, when there's an upset of this magnitude, and this was a 4-1, 5-1 favorite that Canelo was, I'm sure fight fans would love to see a rematch. And now when you have a fight like this, when it goes to the mainstream circles, because Canelo is the biggest thing to a mainstream star outside of boxing, so now mainstream media is going to be talking about it. This is actually going to bring more focus onto boxing. So ironically, this fight is definitely going to get more people talking about boxing, quote, the water cooler talk. So there's going to be push for a rematch with Bivol. But the question goes, well, what's going to happen now with the potential or the proposed third fight with one Triple G? Is that still in play? Has that now fallen by the wayside? Does the public want to see that now? So, you know, a lot of questions now have now sprung from this outcome, and I think it's great for boxing. I think Canelo kind of needs to just stay in that 168 to 160 pound category. Those are his best weights. And fighting up in the light heavyweight division, guys found out that it's not easy to do, especially when you fight the top fighter. Again, even when he fought Sergey Kovalev, if you go back and listen to our preview for the fight, we were not overly enamored with that fight because we felt that Kovalev was a shot fighter. He wasn't the same crusher that rampaged through the light heavyweight division, and by the time that Canelo got to him, he was a shell of himself. So Bivol, again, not having the experience, his biggest wins are against Joe Smith Jr., who beat Bernard Hopkins in his final fight, former light heavyweight champion John Pascal, Isaac Chilemba, who once challenged the aforementioned Sergey Kovalev. So there was nothing there really in the background of Bivol that would make you think that he would pose any serious challenge to Canelo Alvarez, but fought the fight of his life. This, you know, how people can look at it in terms of upsets, because now there's a changing of the narrative, where now first it was supposed to be the Canelo World Tour. Now all of a sudden it's, well, he should be given an A for effort because he fought a great fight. Yes, he did what he had to do, but he clearly lost this fight. He was a heavy favorite. In this fight. I think that this guy was chosen for specific reasons that we mentioned before, and it didn't work out. Doesn't take away anything from what Canelo has done. He lost tonight. We'll see how he bounces back. And this is the beauty of the sport of boxing. No matter how things might look on paper, no matter what all the experts say, this is why they get in the ring, and this is why they have these fights. So fans like us, we can talk about it, we can opine on it, and we can give our 2 cents on it. So boxing, this is what the sport loves. This is what we want to see. This is what we enjoy. And we definitely had to do this. Again, we hate to break up our all-time list, but for this type of major upset with the biggest star in boxing, the #1 pound-for-pound fight in the world, this is going to send serious shockwaves through the sport of professional boxing, because now you have Canelo, who's taken his second loss. You now have Bivol, his stock has risen. What happens with the Triple G fight? Who's going to fight the winner of the aforementioned Joe Smith and Beterbiev? What's going to happen with the pound-for-pound list? Does now Terrence Crawford move up? Shakur Stevenson, he broke in with his recent victory. So now the question is, that's going to start shaking all type of pound-for-pound lists. Again, it won't really affect his status at 168 pounds because he was a champion there, but it just goes into, how this has really turned boxing upside down. And this is good for the sport because it's definitely going to bring the sport some much needed attention. And this is what we love, and this is why we do it. So until the next time, it's Chin Check Radio signing out.